Eylon Levy has been the face of Israel in the UK throughout its genocidal war on Gaza. That was until last week when he was suspended from his duties as an official Israeli spokesperson. And now it's been confirmed he's been fired. The Jerusalem Post has the reasons. They say this. The government office clarified that the latest incident in which he clashed with British Foreign Secretary David Cameron was the straw that broke the camel's back. The government office listed several additional incidents, including Levy's audition on Dancing with the Stars, which was made without confirming this with his superiors beforehand. Additionally, he posted a video at the beginning of the war that turned out to be fake and mocked Nasrallah and his speechwriter instead of calming tensions. And that's reference to Hassan Nasrallah, the head of Hezbollah in Lebanon. I think he joked that Israel had killed his speechwriter, and that's why he said his speech was so boring, so diplomatically not very sensitive. Of course, we can assume the Israelis have not fired Levy for any principled reason, but he will not be missed, and he has, for many, become an updated representative of the banality of evil, justifying the unjustifiable, always with a smug smile on his face. And to mark his departure, we've compiled just some of his worst moments, including spreading lies.
We would say that Hamas beheaded babies and burned whole families alive so that the only thing the forensic pathologists found is two intertwined, burned spines. Hamas has placed its main operational command center underneath the Shifa hospital in Gaza, which is a clear war crime, because they know that Israel doesn't want to hurt civilians, and that Israel is urging civilians to get out of harm's way, and by the way, most of them have.
We, of course, now know there were no beheaded babies, and we also know there was no main command center under Al-Shifa. But Eylon did his job well. He spread the lies which justified a genocidal war, and while Eylon justified a genocide, he smeared anyone who disagreed. This was a tweet he sent after that really big protest in London, 500,000 or so people. He said, "I don't think London has ever seen such a large demonstration of rape apologists before." Now, we talked about this tweet at the time. That demonstration was so huge. So many families from across the country, mums there with their kids, and he's called them all rape apologists. It couldn't be more despicable, really. And smearing people standing up for Gazans was not limited to protesters. He also applied the strategy to international agencies.
We're demanding international accountability now from the global agencies that have said absolutely nothing about Hamas's abuse of hospitals as human shields. I listened to the interview you had just now. The World Health Organization has not condemned Hamas's use of hospitals as human shields once. Not once.
I think we just heard them condemn Hamas.
We just heard them condemn Hamas, right? So he's lying. That's a lie, right? Or he just doesn't have very good listening skills. And that tactic of conflating criticism for Israel with support for Hamas, or softness on Hamas, was also applied to the entire nation of South Africa after they took Israel to the World Court.
The state of Israel emphatically condemns South Africa's decision to play advocate for the devil and to make itself criminally complicit with the perpetrators of the October 7 massacre. The state of Israel will appear before the International Court of Justice at The Hague to dispel South Africa's absurd blood libel. How tragic that the rainbow nation that prides itself on fighting racism will be fighting pro bono for anti-Jewish racists.
Now, if you know the history of South Africa and the history of Israel, right, how dare this history which has fought racism now challenge Israel, right? Israel was one of the last supporters of the apartheid government, sort of doing arms deals with them, essentially. And now you've got a government in South Africa that knows what apartheid looks like, and they're taking Israel to the International Criminal Court. Now, there's quite a straightforward explanation of what's going on here, which is that South Africa cares a lot about apartheid and racism, and that's why they're taking Israel to the court, right? It's completely, really threatening as well. They are now taking part in the crime by taking this to a court. If you're confident in your argument, why not say, okay, yeah, take it to the court, we'll see. If you're trying to threaten people and intimidate them away from taking or seeking legal recourse, what does that say about you? Levy was happy to smear protesters, international agencies, and entire nations, and he was happy to cast aspersions on news anchors as well.
Everyone who has been killed since October 7th would still be alive if Hamas had not declared war. If Hamas were not fighting this war from densely populated areas, and no one else would be hurt.
Yes, but this didn't
Hamas
start on October the 7th
and laid down
in their
its
terms,
arms.
did it?
You're right.
You can say this would not have happened had October the 7th not happened. They would say October the 7th wouldn't have happened had Israel not occupied Gaza in the first place.
I would be very wary of trying in any way to contextualize the atrocities of October 7th.
Just another threat, right? I would be very wary of contextualizing what happened on October the 7th. Christian Guru Murphy's job is to contextualize things, right? Just as it's a government like South Africa's responsibility, if they think that genocide is going on, to take it to the ICJ. And he's not saying, that's not a rational argument. That is saying, I am warning you, don't use context. I am warning you, don't go to the ICJ, right? It's a real bullying tactic. And that somewhat threatening approach was repeated on the news agents when he was asked if Israel would abide by international law.
If the ICJ were to rule against you, in the preliminary round, the actual eventual conclusions may take many years, but in terms of their preliminary assessments, will you comply with their stipulations?
We fully expect the ICJ to throw out this spurious claim.
No, but if they don't,
I'm not going to answer absurd hypotheticals.
It's not absurd hypothetical.
No,
it's either
Lewis,
yes or no.
It is an absurd hypothetical. Because when you have parents sitting in that courtroom whose children were abducted and being held as hostages, the idea that an international court of justice that is supposed to uphold international law might actually order those parents to stop fighting to bring back their children.
So you'll adhere to a court judgment if they rule your way.
It's an absurd hypothetical.
What kind of kangaroo court would that be?
It's an absurd hypothetical.
Why are you even signatories to the convention if you are unwilling to commit to abide by the means by which that convention is policed and enforced? What is the point?
Lewis, the State of Israel was one of the first signatories to the Genocide Convention. Genocide
and so I would have thought that the State of Israel would be the first to say that they would want to see that court stipulations are adhered to for precisely the reason you are referring to.
The State of Israel would like to see international law being applied fairly, understanding that to the extent...
In the way that Israel wants.
No, in a way that understands that on October 7th, we were the victims of an act of genocide.
And sort of just that same sort of unpleasant thing of sort of brushing it off. It's an absurd hypothetical. I'm not going to deal with an absurd hypothetical. Then it gets challenged very effectively. Well, why has Israel even signed this convention if it's not going to abide by the rulings of the court, which is, within this treaty, granted the authority over when or not it's breached? And it goes, Israel was the first to sign it, one of the first to sign the genocide convention. This sort of like, don't you dare go there. Just came across as sort of uniquely unpleasant. That was Levy's strategy for defending Israel's current actions. And this is really shocking. He was also happy to cover for historic acts of ethnic cleansing.
I'm going to bring you back to the words of those politicians, if I may. We're now actually rolling out the Gaza Nakba. Nakba, the Palestinian term for ethnic cleansing. Those are the words of a government minister in your government.
Talk about a little bit of historical context, what the Palestinians refer to as the Nakba. I'm just
asking you about those words.
No, so I want to talk about that word Nakba. When the Palestinians use the word Nakba, they are referring to the consequences of the decision in 1948 to try to scuttle the creation of a Jewish state under the UN General Assembly resolution. They declared war in 1948. That war of annihilation did not go their way, and there were consequences as a result.
So in the Nakba, over 700,000 people were ethnically cleansed. Right, driven out of their homes. And this is sort of documented by even historians who are now very much on sort of the pro-Israel side. So Benny Morris, for example, has written about how there was an ethnic cleansing of Palestinians during the Nakba. And Eylon Levy's response, well, they lost a war and they had to face the consequences. Presumably we're going to see less of this guy. I mean, we have been seeing less of this guy for the last couple of months. You'll note sort of most of those clips are from October, November, December, January. I think he'd been sort of taken off the rounds for the last month or so, but now he's finally been fired. I mean, what can we learn from sort of watching performances like that from this guy who was born in Britain, went to Oxford University, middle class, very, very well-to-do guy, sort of going out and justifying what, we and most of our audience will find completely unjustifiable?
When I watch Eylon Levy, it makes me think of a really disturbing statistic that I saw a few weeks ago, which is that the younger generation in Israel is actually quite significantly more right-wing than the older generation in Israel. And that bucks the trend in most countries and at most historical moments. Normally, the younger generation are more progressive, more left-wing than their elders. But actually in Israel, 74% of people, Israeli Jews, are consider themselves to be right-wing between the ages of 18 and 25. And then when you go to above 65, 46% of Israeli Jews consider themselves to be right-wing. So that to me is first of all, the fact that it is very irregular, but it also, to me, signifies something extremely concerning, which is that what we see by Eylon Levy, and Eylon Levy is very much like part of that kind of younger generation of people who sees himself as potentially someone in the future ruling class of Israel, is we see that particularly if this genocide is able to be completed, and even already with this, the fact that Israel has been able to go this far and been given such a green light by the global community, we are looking at a future of Israel that is where the consensus for a genocidal and fascistic approach to the Palestinian issue is even more pronounced. If we look at Eylon Levy as a kind of portal into the future of Israeli politics, it very much that this kind of approach that he has, which is this complete and utter dismissiveness of any kind of international mechanisms of accountability, this use of intimidation, which is kind of the approach that he goes into a lot of these interviews with, and also this reliance on, not reliance on rights frameworks or legalities or even logic, but reliance on overly evocative and emotive representations of Palestinian people, of their so-called enemies, in order to achieve particular political ends. I think that we are seeing, especially if the global community does not make Israel accountable for what it has done so far, we are seeing the creation of a somehow even more right-wing and fascistic future of Israeli politics, that Eylon Levy kind of offers a portal into that future in the way that he operates. So even if we never see Eylon Levy again, which I think is very unlikely, he is being fired because he is having a minor kind of a domestic political dispute with the current, with the Netanyahus in particular, I think that he is absolutely going to come back into political life. But even if he himself does not come back into political life, the attitude that he has, the politics that he represents, is very much embedded, particularly in the younger generation in Israel, which is extremely concerning.